What's up, 5 o'clock Woodshop? So today we're going to talk about glue ups, right? I mentioned it in some of my other videos, and finally we'll have a short video for once. But yeah, we're going to talk about glue ups, right? So the last video I talked a lot about milling rough sawn lumber down to dimensional lumber, which we use for project builds. Now what I've gone ahead and done is I cut some of that rough sawn lumber down to about approximate size like we did in the last video. But what I didn't talk about in the last video is how you get your 4-4 lumber into those bigger sizes like the 6-4, the 8-4, depending on what you need. And today I need like a 9-4, right? So I have 4-4, which is 1 inch thick lumber, and I need to get it to 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch stock. And so what I'm talking about there, I've got some visual aids. So this is the lumber that we started with, right? And like I said, I've milled it down to about dimensionalized lumber, but I haven't done any face or edge joining yet. So this is just cut down from the rough sawn stock. So we have a 1 inch thick piece here by about 48 inches. And I'll cut that down. But what I need, according to the plans for this dresser build that I have, is 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch stock, which is what I have here in my hand. And so these are the dresser legs. So as you can imagine, those are pretty thick pieces of lumber. So what I mean by 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inches, I got 2 1/4 inches here, 2 1/4 inches here, so it's a perfectly square piece of lumber, right? By a certain length, 33 1/4 in this case. So let's just go ahead and show you that that's a square piece of lumber. Let me get my square. So I'll hopefully be able to zoom in here on the camera, but you'll see that that's square on that face. Flip it around, hitting the mic, square on that face. And then we'll bring it down here to the top. And once again, we're square. So how did we achieve a 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch piece of stock when we started with this rough sawn lumber? And we need to glue boards together. So that's why we call it a glue up, and why it's so important to have accurate and concise edge and face joints to do this. So what we're going to do to get started is we're going to face joint all of these 3 pieces of lumber. Now let me start that over. So we need 2 1/4 inches, right? And so just to break it down for you real simple, in case you're wondering how to do this, I went ahead and took 2 1/4 inches and just took a shot and divided it by 3 and realized that 3 3/4 inch thick pieces of stock will add up to 2 1/4 inch. And so that was kind of lucky. That's a real easy dimension to get 3/4 inch thickness to add them all together to get 2 1/4 inch stock. So what we're going to do is we're going to face joint these pieces so that I can run them through the planer and get an exact 3/4 inch thickness. And then I'm going to show you how we glue it up to get that final process or that final piece of 2 1/4 inch stock. And let me just come a little closer to you here so you can see how important it is to have good face joints. Okay, so you can see a little bit of the saw marks here where I went ahead and cut this to dimension. But really, if you look at this, it almost looks like one continuous piece of lumber, right? On all 3 sides, on all 4 sides, you almost wouldn't be able to tell that these are 3 separate boards put together. And that's because the face joints were nice and flat when I went ahead and glued them together so that you get this real nice tight glue joint. Now, why that's important, right? If I took these 3 pieces that I have here, and they're pretty long and cumbersome, so it's going to be a little hard for me to show you, but if I were to press these together really hard with my hand, you'll see that you've got these huge gaps, right? And that's not just because I'm not holding it super flush. It's because the faces of these pieces of wood are not parallel and not flat, and so they're not joining together properly. So that's why we face joint, and that's why the edge joining and face joining is so critical. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We'll get started, and then we'll just see the finished product. Stay with us. Okay, so now if you'll remember, now that we've got one side completely flat, jointed, right, face jointed, we're going to run the face jointed side down through the planer to get this down to 3/4 inch thickness. So now that I've got all three boards face jointed, I'm going to go ahead and make sure they're parallel and thickness cut to 3/4 inch. All right, so now that we've face jointed and planed each board here, we've got a flat surface aligned with the joiner, and now we've got a parallel surface aligned with the jointed side. So I've got all the boards stacked on top of each other here, pretty much flush, plus or minus a little bit. The glue up will fix that, but you can see now that even really without pressure, a little bit of pressure is necessary because that's what the glue up does, but even without pressure, those boards are pretty much flat and flush against each other. And that's what the planing process does. So now, if I sit them all on edge here, which is fine, that's what I've got there, and I measure the thickness, we've got just above 2¼ inch thickness, which is fine. My other piece of stock is like that as well. And at the end of the day, if we need to, we'll plane that 1/16 of an inch that it's over off. So let's go ahead and get to the glue up and see how that's done. All right, so what I've got here are some Jorgensen Cabinet Master clamps. And so the reason that I have these and why I recommend that you get these as well, you don't need too many. Definitely see the size of the project that you're planning to work on. And if you're going for just kind of all purpose, I'm going to use these all the time like I was in the future, go ahead and get a little bit bigger than what you need. Now, I knew that my tabletop at the end of the day for this dresser wasn't going to be any wider than 24 inches. And so to save a little bit of money to start, I got 24-inch clamps, but they make them all the way out to 48 inches and longer. Those just get pricier, looking at $50, $60 per clamp, depending on your brand. And so I got these two, and I'll link them in the description on Amazon where I got them from. But the reason they're nice is because they stand up on their own, and they provide this large clamping surface against your piece so that you can keep that pressure. And these offer up to 1,500 pounds of clamping pressure, which is quite a bit. And in the middle, I'll just use my regular kind of pressure based clamps. So we'll see that. Now, what you'll see is that I have the pieces of lumber, the planed and jointed lumber, stacked how I want them to. Now, what's really interesting is that this middle piece is a little bit, it's not quite wide enough. And I think that's because of the cut, the initial cut that I made with the table saw on these pieces of stock. And I'm going to cover that at the end of the video, some more adjustments and alignments that I realized I needed to make on my table saw after I cut these pieces, some issues that I was noticing. So I want to help you realize those issues before you ever run into them. And I had seen them in videos too and just didn't pay attention to them, so I hope you don't. But anyways, it's a little bit shorter. So when I glue it up, I'm going to try to just level it out just a little bit so that when I make that final dimensional cut on the table saw, it won't take off too much and I can still end up with 2 1/4 inch. But anyways, I've laid the pieces out as I want them glued together. And so what you're going to do now that they're laid out is you're going to fold one piece down, the face that you want glue on. I'm going to keep this one in the middle because I'm going to put glue on both faces, and then I'm going to rotate this one down, and we're going to get our glue. So this is the glue that I use, and that's because I've seen the most people using it. Titebond 2 Premium Wood Glue, water-resistant interior and exterior, faster set time, stronger than wood, water cleanup. Now, most glues probably say that, that's fine, but this was the first time that I used this glue, and I will say that I was very impressed. It did set really, really quickly, and it's easier to use than the Gorilla Glue that I had been using, but honestly, it's dealer's choice, right? So now we're going to go ahead and glue these panels up. So to do that, uncap your glue and spread in a zigzag pattern. Be generous with your glue because you want glue to drip out of the sides once you press these panels together so that you know that the glue is evenly spread throughout your piece. I'm actually probably not being generous enough on this first one. If you've got a roller, use a roller. I don't have a roller, so I'm using my finger. Yeah, that was not enough, so I'll have to put a little bit more in that corner, and then I'm just using my finger to kind of generally spread it along the piece. And you want to get those edges really good there. And it's okay that it's like really messy, right? Because just like when we join our pieces of wood, we've gone ahead and over dimensionalized this piece. So it's really 2.5 inches thick, right? It's not the 2 1/4 that we end with, knowing that we'll cut some in the future. Now this stuff sets in about 30 minutes. It's more time than I need, but you want to make sure that you go a little bit quickly with it. Just like I said, get those edges really, really good. And hopefully once you apply that clamping pressure, it'll take care of those edges for you. But why not just help it out while we're here, you know? So get all that glue. I'm going to steal a little bit from this side and put it, yeah, real good right in there. Okay, so now that you've got that, you stack it up. Okay, then we're going to get our second piece, which is right here. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to move these up, get them as flush as we can with each other. Doesn't have to be perfect, remember, over dimensionalized. Bring this one up. You want it to be touching the wood, and then now that it's touching, we're going to set that piece, like I said, in the middle. We're going to twist our clamps to apply that clamping pressure. I kind of don't like where that's at. Okay. Do enough there. This was so easy yesterday. I'm just being goofy. There we go. All right, two-handed operation. Get it nice and tight, okay? Come around to your other side. Same thing, nice and tight. It's tricky because of that one shorter piece. There we go, I think that'll be okay. Now you can see, if you can, if not, I'll pan over it with the camera, all this glue squeezing out on the sides. Where did I put my clamps? That would be really good to know right about now. Oh. All right, like I said, some regular pressure clamps. I'm gonna get these bad boys, set them into place. Curious to see how that'll work out with that piece being a little bit narrower than the rest. Just get a really good squeeze on there. Now these don't hold pressure as well, so they're probably only rated for 500 to 600 pounds of pressure. 1500 is a little overkill, 600 is a little underkill. Okay, so now that we've got our glue set there, we're just gonna wait. Let it drip, that's okay. Let it gob up on the sides, that's all right. And we're gonna let it set overnight, and then we're gonna come back tomorrow and cut this down to final dimension. I'll be honest, I'm a little worried about that middle piece being a little bit narrower than the rest of the pieces. I didn't really anticipate that, and I could have been a little bit better about this and gotten another piece of lumber as soon as I realized that that was happening. It looks like it's about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch shorter, and I'm about a 1/16 over, so we'll have to see how that works out. We'll play it real close here. But all right, let's go talk about the table saw. We'll wait for this to set up. All right, team, let's talk about table saws, right? So this is a 10-inch DEWALT table saw. You saw it in my shop tour video. Brand new out of the box, this thing is great. And I thought it was perfect because it's got this rack and pinion style fence. I talked a lot about this in my video, and I'm gonna talk about it some more here. So the benefits of rack and pinion style fence is that it keeps it perfectly square all the time. Now, I used to have an older table saw, a Craftsman from the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s, given to me by an old family friend. And that one, you would slide the table saw in here, clamp it, and it would use that clamping pressure to keep the back of the fence attached to the table of the table saw. Now that's fine, but you kind of have to check square every single time that you do it to make sure that you clamped it and applied that square pressure. Now the problem with that is it's a pain in the butt and you have to do it frequently. With a rack and pinion, it'll keep it square. Now, the mistake that I made, and I saw other people warn me about, so I'm warning you about it here. Notice the flashing warning signs on the screen. Don't make the same mistake that I did. I assumed that my fence, rack and pinion and all, were completely square out of the box. And what I noticed was as I was cutting stock, and I really noticed it once I got down to the thinner and narrower pieces of stock, right when I was cutting those 2.5-inch strips of stock, I noticed that while I had it tight to the fence up here, as it got through the back after the riving knife here, I noticed an 1/8-inch gap along the piece of stock, or between the piece of stock and the fence, every time, no matter what I did. And what you don't want to do is apply pressure to the back of the piece as you're pushing it through to try to combat that 1/8-inch gap. And the reason you want to do that is because it'll cause binding with your blade here, and that can be super dangerous. Now, a technique with your table saw, and really the one you should always use, is to stand off center from the piece of stock as you push it through. And so what I mean by that is I'll record a clip of me practicing it or doing it, simulating it, so you can see it right here on the side of this video. You want to stand off center so that if the blade does bind, what that's going to cause the piece of stock to do is kick back and shoot through. So you never want to be directly behind your piece of stock as you're pushing it through the table saw in case you encounter that binding and it pushes it through, because it'll push it through really fast right into your gut, and that could be super, super dangerous depending on what you're pushing. I mean, I just would never do it. So you don't want to apply that backwards pressure. So what I did to figure this out is I took my tape measure and I came to the edge of my blade. and I measured from the inside of the tooth to the fence. So right now I've got it set at 2¼ inches. Lo and behold, that's my final dimensionalized width that I need this piece at. So you can tell what I cut last. 2¼ inches right there. So I come to the back of the fence now, close as I can get it with the riving knife there. And to align it, I actually removed the riving knife, and I recommend that you do the same. And I measured it, and I was about 1/8 of an inch further away from the fence than I was at the front of the blade. And so there are some set screws here. Each table saw will have some. And I loosened it, and it allows you to make those micro adjustments to the fence. And I got it to where I wanted to. I corrected that 1/8 of an inch, and I tightened it back. And now my fence is square to the blade. And you want to make sure that the blade is square to the miter slots if you're using miter slots. I haven't done that yet. So the process, if you're using a crosscut sled or something like that, is to align your blade to the miter slot, and then to align your fence to the blade or to the miter slot. Either one will work. So always make sure you do that. That was kind of my big mistake that I had been making, and I've ripped a lot of wood with it out of square. And with the bigger pieces, the plywood, you might not notice, and maybe that's why my table isn't super square. Now, the other thing I did is I replaced the blades. So you'll notice my blade is different than what you've seen in past videos. You'll notice that there's a lot more teeth here. This is a 60-tooth fine finish blade. And I'm kind of experimenting, right? Because you would use this for cleaner cuts. And the reason you might not want to do that is because as you're cutting through larger stock, thicker stock, you might dull out the blades sooner with a fine cut blade. Now, you can get all the way up to ultra fine. I didn't do that. What I started with was this DEWALT contractor blade that makes fast cutting for plywood and things like that. So this is the actual package that I got the fine finishing blade in. You'll see that it's good for hardwoods, softwoods, plastic boards, plywoods, and then it starts getting less usable with plywood, laminate, melamine, and non-ferrous material. Now, there are better blades like your contracting blades like this one that's only 24 teeth. That's better for those materials. So just realize what you're cutting and buy your blade for that. My other tip is don't cheap out on your table saw blade. Get the nicer carbide tipped, titanium, whatever you got to do, blades for your table saw, because while this is one of the most versatile tools in your shop, it's also one of the most dangerous. So you really want a good solid blade that you can rely on, or that is reliable in your shop. So spend a little bit extra money, and I'll let you know if this holds up over time. Hopefully it makes it through this project and many more. Let's get back to the glue up. Okay, now something else I wanted to talk to you guys about while we wait for that glue up to dry are these little stop blocks that I was able to make out of some scrap wood. And I told you that I installed T-tracks on this tabletop so that I could use these for stop blocks or clamps in the future. Now, clamps you're probably just going to have to buy. And they make stop blocks that you can buy. PowerTech makes them, or PowerTech, sorry, and all kinds of other brands. I'll throw some examples up on the screen now. And no shame to anyone that's going to buy those. They're pretty expensive. And the only reason why I don't have them right now is because when I bought these T-tracks, I was going to buy the whole setup, right? The clamps, the stop blocks, everything. And it was an extra like $60 for 2 stop blocks and 2 clamps all in my cart. So I decided I'd wait until I really needed them. Now, unfortunately, when you really need something, you usually don't have time to wait for 2-day shipping from Amazon. And so the nice thing about the stop blocks is that you can actually make your own. So T-tracks, they have special T-track bolts that you slide into the rails here, and they keep them locked into places. You're using the stop blocks or clamps, etc. But what's nice about T-tracks is it's actually just a 1/4 inch wide, and so you can use a 1/4 inch hex bolt, and it fits perfectly into the rail here, so that you can make your own T-clamp. So what I did was I took a 1/4 inch bolt with a non-lag tip on it, so not a pointy tip, right? And I got some scrap wood, glued it together, cut it to size. I kind of messed up the cut back here, so it's not super pretty, but this is a flat face. And now it's a stop block. And you'll see that that guy isn't going anywhere, and I don't even have it set that tightly. And so the reason you want to do that, right, is because if you remember and if you can see, this T-track is directly in line with my outfeed on my miter saw. So I can push pieces of stock directly into my miter saw, align it with the fence on the miter saw, push it against this stop block, and every single time I'll get the exact same measured cut without having to remeasure the piece of stock. And so to adjust it, it's really simple. I have 2 washers, one at the bottom, one on the top, and then a 1/4 inch nut. And so you just loosen it up, see that it kind of starts to spin on me. That's okay. And then you just slide it in place. So lift up a little bit.
Sorry about that. That's super weird. Seems like my microphone cut out. I think it's going to be an issue the rest of the video. But what I'm showing you here is just that the stop block slides back and forth along that T-track once you have loosened it, and then you can tighten it back pretty easily with that wrench or even just your hands depending on how tight you want it. Then you can slide it right out of the T-track to move it around the table when you need to.
All right, for you guys, it's been about 2 seconds. For me, it's been about 12 to 14 hours, maybe a little bit less or plus or minus, but we've got our glue up complete here. It's dry, so we're gonna go ahead and take it out of the clamps and take a look at the final glue up. Okay, so we've got our final finished piece here, or not finished piece, but we've got the glue up complete, and unfortunately that bow is still there, but it's okay. It looks like maybe a 16th to a 32nd of an inch higher on one side, and maybe a 16th of an inch lower on another. But that's good because we have about a quarter of an inch to go from 2¼ or from 2½ down to 2¼ so we'll try to take that off appropriately here. So I don't have to worry too much about the glue as I run it through my table saw, just obviously noting that this would not be the side that I want to run through the table saw since it's got kind of all the drips from the glue, as this is the way that it was laid down with gravity bringing that glue out. So this will be the side that I run through the table saw. So let me go ahead and make some measurements and then we'll get to cutting.
Okay, so yeah, I was right. My microphone died, and that's pretty unfortunate. The rest of the video is pretty quiet, but I'm going to go ahead and just narrate what I'm doing. So after I made that final cut to 2¼ inch in width on the table saw, I brought over my Orbital sander, set it to the variable speed of 5. It doesn't really matter. Use 120 grit sandpaper. Wouldn't use anything coarser like 40, 60, or 80 because you'll take too much off, but 120 or 220 is fine. And I sanded out some of those soft blade marks that get left in the wood, and then some of the glue that had dripped onto the parallel or flat face. And so that's what I'm doing here, and then we take it over to the miter saw and cut the final dimensions of the lumber, bringing it from about 35 inches to 33¼ and you'll see me, I talk about it, but you can't hear it. I use that stop block to measure exactly the correct length that I need, 33¼ based off of the first cut that I made on the original table leg. And the reason you use that to make repeatable cuts is since this is a table leg, or a dresser leg in this case, you want them all to be the exact same size so that everything sits flush on the ground and there's no rocking movement because one leg may be longer than the other. So that stop block really helps there. Or if you don't have anything like that, you can just try your best to make as accurate a cut as possible.
All right, guys, super sorry about the audio and the microphone. It died on me about halfway through recording that video, and I just never noticed. So I'll try to notice that kind of thing in the future, but it's okay. Most of the video that it died on was just, stuff I could narrate through. So this is the final product here. Obviously, we've got two identical table legs now, same length, everything like that, same thickness. So hopefully you learned something about the glue up process, why we do it, why the edge and face joining is so important prior to the glue up. And that's kind of it. I threw in a lot of other stuff in there about the table saw and the stop block. So I know, my videos are titled one thing, and then I throw in like all kinds of tips and advice about maybe a power tool or something that I'm using or something that I'm doing along the way. But I think that stuff is helpful if you're watching the videos, all the way through. If not, just feel free to skip forward to what you want to see. But again, guys, you guys have been great, really growing the subscriber count, likes, comments, everything like that. I really appreciate all the support, guys. So just keep that coming. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll reply, everything like that. But that's been another episode from 5 o'clock Woodshop where we did a glue up and started working on our dresser legs. I'll finish these and then finish the rails and stiles for the side panels and drawer fronts. And we'll probably get into using the router table for tongue and groove in the next video. I also have a pretty cool video coming out here soon about French drains and drainage in a yard, which is a little bit different than a wood shop, but hopefully another tutorial for people out there that need some help and want a DIY project to do on the weekend. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, subscribe for more. This has been 5 o'clock Woodshop.